All right, good morning, everybody. Or good morning in New York, good afternoon in Turkey. So today, last time, you remember how we looked at Mozart's operas, particularly Don Giovanni, the great Don Giovanni. So much exciting music and vivid characters and interesting plot situations. Today we're going to talk about Beethoven. Who is the next generation after Mozart as a composer, and obviously one of the most famous composers, maybe the most famous composer of classical music that we think about or that we associate with classical music. Here's Beethoven's Piano Sonata in C minor. Go back. I didn't realize that. That should be better. Okay, that's what I wanted you to hear earlier. Beethoven Piano Sonata, written in 1797. And the reason I played that, very famous piano sonata by Beethoven, is that it already shows a lot of the features that we associate with Beethoven's style. And what are some of those things? Okay, well, for one thing, the enormous intensity and urgency that Beethoven wrote into his music. Just starting with a simple chord. Beethoven can just write one chord and make it sound intense, make it sound powerful, make it sound emotional. Just the chord of C minor that he got. So there's that. There's also the enormous contrast of dynamics between loud and soft that Beethoven puts into his music. And there's also the very high level of dissonance. You remember maybe early on we talked about the difference between dissonance in music and consonance. A dissonant is a sound Dissonance is a sound that is unstable, that needs to be resolved. And Beethoven loves to play those very long, sustained dissonances in his music. Just listen to that opening one more time to hear how that works. dissonant, consonant. Dissonant, consonant. So Beethoven spends longer on a dissonance than he does on a consonance, and so he creates greater tension in his music. In that way, he creates greater tension in his music. And also the enormous rhythmic energy. When we got to the fast part of the movement, that was the slow part. When we got to the fast part, so once again, great rhythmic energy, great rhythmic variety and rhythmic energy, and a huge emphasis on accents, accents that come at unusual parts of the measure. So that's Beethoven creating a new musical language out of the classical musical language of Haydn, Mozart, and the predecessors. And he's doing that already very early on. So that's one reason why Beethoven is so exciting to listen to as a composer, as we'll hear shortly. Now, the other thing that we know about Beethoven is that one of the most famous things about Beethoven, of course, is that he went deaf as a composer. He went deaf and could not hear. And this already began in his life in the 1790s, right around the time that he was writing this piano sonata. And this was a great, it's one of the most famous facts in music history, Beethoven's deafness, and it was very upsetting to Beethoven, of course, and I wanted to read you a little bit of a letter he wrote. It was a letter he wrote as he knew he was going deaf, and he wrote it to his brothers, but he never sent it, and it was written in 1802. It's written 1802, and he talks about what it was like to be losing his hearing and what that meant for him. And here's what he said. I won't read the whole thing because it's kind of long, but I'll read some of it. He said, "Oh, you men that think that I am stubborn and very angry, how greatly do you wrong me? You do not know the secret cause which makes me seem that way to you. From my childhood on, my heart and soul have been full of tender feeling of goodwill, and I was even inclined to accomplish great things. But think that for 6 years now, I have been hopelessly afflicted, made worse by senseless physicians, from year to year deceived with hopes of improvement, finally compelled to face the prospect of a lasting illness whose cure will take years, or perhaps be impossible. Though I was born with a fiery and active temperament, I was soon compelled to be isolated, to live life alone. If at times I tried to forget this, oh, how harshly was I flung back by the doubly sad experience of my bad hearing. It was impossible for me to say to people, speak louder, shout, for I am deaf. How could I possibly admit an illness in the one sense which ought to have been more perfect in me than in others? A sense which I once possessed to the highest perfection, a perfection such as few in my profession enjoy or ever have enjoyed." So what he's saying there is it's doubly bad to be deaf in the society, but it's especially bad to be so if you are a composer, and that faculty of yours, the hearing, is supposed to be so highly developed. So Beethoven, in this letter to his brothers from 1802, he talks how this despair led him to the verge of suicide. He said, "Such incidents drove me to despair. A little more of that, and I would have ended my life. It was only my art that held me back. Ah, it seemed impossible to leave the world until I had brought forth all that I felt was within me. So I endured this wretched existence, truly wretched for so susceptible a body. And patience is what I must now choose for my guide. I hope my determination to remain firm, to endure, will please the fates, and perhaps I shall get better, perhaps not. I am ready, forced to become a philosopher already in my 28th year. Oh, it is not easy. So in other words, Beethoven was on the verge of despair, on the verge of committing suicide, and then he thought, no, I have music to write, I have art. And he says, art held me back. And that's a very important message for everybody, and certainly for Beethoven, not to give in to despair, not to give in to situations that seem hopeless. And so right around this time, then, Beethoven has a new resolve to that even if there's nothing he can do about his deafness and the perceptions people have of it, he's going to take charge in a way and write the best music he can. And therefore, right around this time, 1802, begins a new phase in Beethoven's music. And it's a phase of his music that contains some of his most famous pieces. And let me just go back here a second. Beethoven, okay. So Beethoven, this is sometimes called his middle period of composition, but also sometimes his heroic period of composition, because this idea of overcoming adversity, the deafness that he couldn't stop, but he was going to deal with, dominates this period. And also his Third Symphony is nicknamed the Heroic Symphony, the Eroica Symphony. That was written in 1803. And the hero that is referred to in the title of the Eroica Symphony was Napoleon, who was a figure that Beethoven greatly admired. And the Third Symphony embodies some aspect of that heroism. The problem was that when Napoleon declared himself emperor of Europe or of France and other regions, Beethoven got discouraged and disillusioned, and he decided that Napoleon was just a power-hungry, somebody who just wanted to grab power for his own sake. So, very famously, Beethoven tore up the dedication page of the Eroica Symphony and changed it to, he called it the Heroic Symphony. He took off the name of Napoleon because Napoleon was, had disillusioned him. Let's see if this erases now. Oh, it doesn't erase. All right. So, what I want to talk about today now a little bit is the Fifth Symphony of Beethoven. The Fifth Symphony, which he wrote in 1807, and which is the one that's discussed in your textbook. The Fifth Symphony embodies many aspects of this middle period of Beethoven. And so the Fifth Symphony begins with this very famous motto. What we see in the Fifth Symphony of Beethoven is this intense concentration again. Instead of a theme, we have a short motive. Just that motive. And then it's repeated. And that motive, which has the rhythmic profile, short, 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 long. Short, 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 long. That comes throughout the entire first movement. Let's just listen to a bit how that happens here. I'm going to play the opening of the Fifth Symphony. Okay, disc 2, track 5. Here's the Fifth Symphony now. So, in that symphony, you remember when I was visiting in Turkey, we talked about Mozart's G minor symphony, the symphony in G minor. Well, this symphony is written, 30 years or so later, and it has this very different feeling to it. Whereas Mozart's symphony had a full theme. Remember? That's a full theme. Beethoven just goes. Plus, he holds out the last note so long that you're not sure whether it's going to continue or how it's going to continue. And then finally. And so on. So Beethoven has so many surprises and unanticipated parts of the symphony, unanticipated ways in which it continues, that it constantly keeps you unsure of what's going to happen next. So that's that motive at the beginning of Beethoven's symphony. And let me just play you the rest of the exposition. You remember when I was in Turkey, we talked about the sonata form. Well, the first movement of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony is in a sonata form. So it has an exposition, a development, and a recapitulation and a coda. So let's continue listening to the exposition. So that was the exposition. Do you remember how I talked about how in an exposition of a sonata form you begin in one key and move to another key? So in this case, Beethoven began in C minor, and he ends in another key. He ends in this key, and he begins in this key. And he ends with that same motive. The last bit. Notice how it's all still based on the same motive, though. Short, 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 long. Short, 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 long. Short, 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 long. So then he repeats the exposition. By the way, if you have the Kerman Listen text, there's a listening chart on page 233. Page 233 that you can follow through the first movement of this. So we're going back to hear the exposition. Now we're in the part of the exposition where we've moved to a new key and we get what is called a second theme or a second group. But notice it's still based on the main theme. It's still short, 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 long, long. It's like So there we are again at the end of the exposition with this. We're in the new key. And then Beethoven begins what's called the development section. Remember how we talked about the development section of a sonata form takes the same themes but begins to mix them up. There's a lot more instability. Places you don't know where he's going. He modulates to new keys. He takes apart or fragments the theme. So here's what he does in the development section. I want to just stop it there. This is the climax of the development section, and Beethoven manages to take his theme and fragment it into shorter and shorter notes so that you begin like this here. And he just takes these two notes. Those same two notes. Sorry. Same two notes. So he's taken just two notes from the theme and he's playing them along different parts of the orchestra, and then he manages to work it so that he's just have one note in alternation. Of the orchestra. So he's reduced the theme from 5 or 6 notes to 2 notes to 1 note. One note alternating back and forth. Now he's putting it back together, and we're in the part of the movement called the recapitulation, right? Exposition, development, recapitulation. He goes through the themes again as he had done earlier on in the recapitulation. So here's the first theme back with us. Sorry, number 10. Keep pressing the wrong button here. So that was another surprise that Beethoven put in. He inserts a little passage for the oboe right in the middle of where you don't expect it. The oboe. And so on. So Beethoven never does anything exactly the same. The recapitulation has changes that he puts in it. Listen to that oboe again. The oboe. Second theme. So, end of the recapitulation. Beethoven is in the key of C major now. But that's not where he wants to end up. He needs to get back to... So there's a long passage that, remember, he calls the coda. Coda comes at the end of the movement, and that passage brings us back to the main key. We're just going to stop a moment to change the tape here. Too bad this thing won't erase. Okay. So let me just say a word then. This coda that we just heard at Beethoven's Fifth Symphony is very long and very exciting. Before Beethoven, codas are very short little conclusions to movements. But Beethoven writes a very exciting coda in the Fifth Symphony. And among the things he does in the coda, is he writes a new theme. That particular theme that theme we hadn't heard before, and so Beethoven introduces this to bring us back to the key of C minor. Dum bum 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 bum. So we finally get back. So that was the first movement of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, and in the sonata form. I don't have time today to go through all the other movements in detail, but I'd like you to listen to them on your own. The main thing I want to stress is that for Beethoven, these four movements of his Fifth Symphony are part of a larger whole. He doesn't just view them as separate individual movements, but as part of a larger whole, moving toward some kind of resolution or a kind of triumphant conclusion. And one of the ways he does this is, well, there's several ways. Let me say a little bit about the second movement. The second movement of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, which is the slow movement. Remember how many symphonies have a first movement in sonata form and then a slow movement, something that is slow. So what he does in this case is he writes a theme and variations movement. And he writes it in the key of A flat. This is what his theme sounds like. But what Beethoven does in this movement that's unusual is he has two themes that he uses for his variations, and the second one sounds like that. Now, the feature of that second theme is that it has this same motive that we heard in the first movement, short, 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 long, is at the basis of this. So it sounds again like this. Hear that? Short, 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 long. So listen to how that happens in this movement now. We're going to listen to a little bit of the second movement. The Andante movement. And now, this theme that I mentioned. So Beethoven takes that theme and makes it a very robust and forceful march. He doesn't want you to forget that theme. And it's all based on the short, 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 long motive. So he's connecting it to the first movement. Now, the variations go on from there, the theme and variations. You can follow this, by the way, on page 236 of your textbook, there's an outline of the whole of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. Now, just to go a little more, the third movement of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony is in the form of a scherzo. A scherzo is a kind of piece that it derived from the older minuet, such as we heard in Mozart's G minor symphony, but it's more energetic, it's more surprising, and it has more rhythmic vitality to it. So, and there's also greater contrast. So listen to the opening of the third movement of Beethoven. What did we hear there? We heard the second of the two themes that Beethoven presented. The same motive, short, 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 long. And it keeps going. So on. Keeps playing with it. So that same motive. Short, 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 long. We keep hearing there in this movement. So it's been in all the movements so far. Listen to that again. So this movement has that aspect of picking up. Beethoven liked to think of the symphony as a kind of organic, complete unity whole. How could he achieve that? Because he still had four separate movements. One way was to bring this motive, short, 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 long, in some different form or other in every movement. And so we've heard it in the first movement, and then we heard in the second movement, and now in the third movement. So each of these movements does that in that way. Now the other thing that Beethoven does that's so wonderful in this symphony, very original, nobody had thought of it before, instead of having a break, a pause, a silence between the third movement and the last movement, he runs them right into one another. It's a very exciting moment, and I'll play it for you on the orchestra. But first, I'll tell you how it works. Okay, sorry. Took me here. You get that same theme back again. And you expect the movement to end. That same theme that we've just been hearing. But instead, what he does is this. So he resolves the chord instead of, he goes. What that's called in music, if I can find a space here, is a deceptive cadence. Deceptive because it doesn't go to where you expect it to go. And it ends in open. So once again, this is what it sounds like on the piano, and then I'll play it in the orchestra. And that same short, long, short, long. And then Beethoven does this very mysterious thing, and that's played on the timpani. And we don't know what's going to happen because we expected the movement to end. But what he's going to do is he's going to lead us right into the finale. So listen to how that happens. Let's see. After track 17, okay. I'm going to play that one more time so you can hear it. Here we go. 3 notes. We get the timpani. Now we don't know what's going to happen next. So what Beethoven has done is he's moved directly from that third movement into the finale, into the last movement, and he's given us what we heard just now was the beginning of the finale. And he's moved there through this very exciting, we have a huge crescendo. Building up to that. And then that's just, I have to get after that, and then we get the other thing he's done, he's moved from C minor to C major. So there's a sense of triumph here. Let's listen to that one more time, how he does that. Here's the crescendo. So there's a sense in which this last movement of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony that you're hearing is not just the last movement of a symphony, it's a culmination, it's a climax, it's what the whole symphony has been leading up to, this great moment when the chords come there. And the other thing is the way he uses the full orchestra there at the very end. In fact, he even adds instruments. He adds the trombones. 3 trombone parts come in just for that finale. Trombones playing, so it makes it even grander. The trombones have not had anything to do through the first 3 movements. They're saved strategically, if you will, for this great last movement that Beethoven. And we're going to take a break in a minute, but I want to just play you the very ending because it's so grand and so exciting. So let me move ahead there. Let me just make one point, actually, before we take a break. One thing that Beethoven does in this movement that's very interesting, again, connecting up the different movements, is he brings back the scherzo movement at the end of the development section so that he can recreate this effect of moving from kind of uncertainty into triumph. In the middle of this movement, this is what it sounds like. Remember this from the scherzo? So that's the recapitulation. He's done the same process again that he did at the end of the scherzo. Now let me just play the coda, the very exciting coda of this movement, and you can hear how it ends. Oops, sorry. The whole symphony. The coda. So that's the coda to the last movement, and it's so big and so loud and so triumphant, partly because it also acts as a coda to the whole symphony. That sense of triumph. And remember how I mentioned how in his document that I read to you, that letter to his brothers, he talks about how overcoming despair, triumphing over despair and sadness and adversity or difficult situations. Well, this is what the Fifth Symphony does. It starts in a very unstable and difficult part, uncertainty, and it ends with this blaze of triumph. And so the whole symphony traces a kind of path from this darkness and despair, uncertainty, to triumph and overcoming. And so it's a kind of message that Beethoven is sending through this symphony about music, about life, about art, and that's what makes the Fifth Symphony so exciting to listen to across all its four movements. So what we're going to do now is take a little break for 5 minutes or so, and then I want to come back and we can talk a little bit more about some other aspects of Beethoven. So we'll take a break now. At the Fifth Symphony, from his middle or heroic period, which puts these kinds of things on the whole scale of a symphony, the orchestration, the form, the organic unity and kind of trajectory from one movement to the next. Very exciting. Well, Beethoven, after about 1815, I just put on the board this description of what we think of as his third period or late period after 1815. Now remember that Beethoven was increasingly deaf. He could hear somewhat, but not very much. And so he became more isolated and withdrawn within. And which is not to say that he was not still very powerful in his music and personality, but there's a sense in which many of the late works have a kind of more introspective, looking within, or meditative quality that is very much part of Beethoven's personality. And there's a number of string quartets that he wrote in this period. Actually, I was going to put on, did I have that there? Just a teeny bit. Yes, there it is. Let's see, I need the CD. How did this change to? I wonder if they're hearing that. Well, I guess they have. I just want to play a little bit of a late string quartet that begins with a fugue, fugal form, and it's very quiet and meditative. I'm just going to put this on here. So that gives you just a little idea of a late Beethoven piece. That is his string quartet, so just 4 strings in C sharp minor, Opus 131, and it's written in the form of a fugue, or using imitative polyphony. So the piece is much more introspective, more meditative than the other. But in his last period, there's one particular work that encompasses everything, both the very grand style of the middle period and the more introspective or meditative style of the later period. And that's his Ninth Symphony, his last symphony, which he completed in 1824. And I have a DVD performance, and I want to play you some excerpts of that. So the Ninth Symphony also has 4 movements, like other symphonies, but there are some big differences. The movements are very big. The whole symphony takes almost an hour and 10 minutes to play. It's almost 70 minutes to play the Ninth Symphony. And the last movement is particularly famous for having the use of a soloist, vocal soloist, and a chorus. And I want to just play you a bit of the first movement. Now I'm going to switch to the DVD so you can see that. That's great. Just pause it there. Oh, can they see me now, or do I have to switch back?
Probably have to switch back.
Oh, I don't want to do that. Okay, camera. Okay, I just wanted to, I'm going to put this back on, but this is a wonderful performance by the Berlin Philharmonic with Claudio Abbado. And you see the different instruments that are playing in this big orchestra, and the way Beethoven features all these different instruments, and the incredible power, again, that we already heard in the Fifth Symphony, and this use of great rhythmic energy. So that I don't have to keep switching back and forth, what I want to do now is just play you, I'm going to play you in succession a little bit of the next movement, and then I'm going to play the entire finale, which lasts about 22 minutes. And I want you to get a sense of the use of the chorus, the vocal soloist, and the orchestra. And the text of the movement, I should tell you, in the finale, is a poem by the German poet Friedrich Schiller, and it's called The Ode to Joy. And it's about universal brotherhood, universal kind of man accepting other man. And so it's a very optimistic poem in the last movement. So I'm going to switch now, and then we'll have time for a few questions at the end.
listening to the Oxygen and the final part of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. We have no question. You know, music speaks for itself. Thank you.
Oh, well, in some ways that's true. The music does speak for itself. But yeah, it's hard to know what to say after a performance, an exciting performance of the Ninth Symphony, because it touches us as human beings, as individuals. It touches us as members of a larger community, whether in the United States or in Turkey. I don't know how many of you know, I meant to say this before, that there's a passage in the movement that we just heard that is known as the Turkish March. And it's the passage where it was very, suddenly you heard the cymbals and the triangle and other instruments, and Beethoven is imitating there a kind of music that was very popular around 1800, 1820, of the Turkish Janissary band from the Ottoman Empire. I believe they were called Meter, M-E-H-T-E-R. These orchestras, the Janissaries were this group of soldiers, highly trained, and I'm sure you've seen, actually when I was in Istanbul, a Janissary band came by, marching by, when I was up near the Suleimani Mosque, with their costumes and their instruments. They were a military band, and Beethoven evokes the sound of the Janissary or Meter in the Ninth Symphony. You heard it there with the cymbals, and that's why that passage in the finale of the Ninth Symphony is often known as the Turkish March. He's bringing in this, so not just Western music or not just classical music, but he's bringing in other kinds of music that he would have been familiar with. But again, if you have any questions about that, I'd be happy to answer them. And if not, then so next week I believe we'll be looking at piano music, and I've asked for the students in Ankara to begin to think about concert reports, and I will be getting back some of the earlier homeworks, but over the next 2 weeks you should be thinking of going to a concert and writing it up as a short 3-page paper. But I'll be talking with Professor Turkmen about that. Okay, so any further questions for today?
Yes, sir, we have some questions from Ankara.
Okay.
Yes, you were mentioning about 3 parts of the symphony. You said first one is exposition, second one is development, and we couldn't hear the third part.
What I was talking about is in the first movement, just the first movement. It has, well, really 4 parts: exposition, development, recapitulation, and coda.
Could you write it?
Yeah, it's in the book.
Development.
Exposition, development, recapitulation, coda, and the recapitulation repeats pretty much what the exposition has done, but in the home key. And the development fragments the themes, takes them apart, and the coda is a kind of conclusion. And these are the parts of the sonata form. Which is discussed, the sonata form is discussed on pages 183, 183 to 185. The sonata form. So I hope that clears that up a little bit.
Thank you, sir.
Other questions?
No, thanks.
No other questions for today? Okay. Well, we'll see you all next week.